The Penguins had an intriguing July 1st, and Pat and I are going to discuss everything they did on this Monday right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Synonym for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So the Pittsburgh Penguins were at least a little bit busy on this free agent frenzy day. Not as busy as a team like the Nashville Predators were by signing Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, and Brady Shea. They went all out in getting some of the top free agents in this class. The Penguins didn't do that, but they did make some moves of their own. And let's start with a big one here. The Penguins signing defenseman Matt Grezlcyk to a one-year deal worth $2.75 million. So I'll start with this. If this move was made 2 years ago, I would have been jumping for joy. I remember 2 years ago on this show, I said numerous times I would have loved for the Penguins to trade for Grzelcyk just because I felt like he was one of the most underrated defensemen in the NHL. His playing time was going down a little bit with the Bruins, but he was someone that I really wanted to get just because of how good he was in Boston. But since then, it just hasn't been that great. This past season, especially the worst season of his career. I definitely think the Penguins are hoping for a bounce back with him here, but still $2.75 million for someone who I think is going down at this point in his career. It's a little bit questionable for me. I think I would have rather them use that money to go get someone like an Oliver Shillington or an Eric Brandstrom, or maybe just bring back P.O. Joseph, because I think those players are better than Grzelcyk, but I'm still obviously going to give Grzelcyk a shot. He's been a very good defenseman in the NHL for numerous years. And yeah, I know it's not the case anymore this past year, but they'll at least try and give him a shot to bounce back. But when you saw that move, what were your thoughts overall?
It's underwhelming, to say the least. And I don't know if you brought it up, but it was something of a concern that he was a healthy scratch in 10 of Boston's last 11 playoff games.
And their defense is not good. So that's kind of concerning to me.
Yeah, this wasn't the big bad Bruins of the 2010s where their lineup on defense was just stacked with great player after great player, and he found himself as the odd man out. He definitely earned those scratches, so to speak. But I mean, 1 year, 275, it's fine. You know, somebody said it on Twitter today, and I kind of agree with this. And obviously, it's not a defense of everything that Kyle Dubas has done today and in the recent past, but you know good and well, if Ron Hextall was still the general manager, these guys would be getting multiple years in some kind of trade protection to go along with it. So I can understand bringing in Grzelcyk for the defense. If he bounces back, that's great. And if this season doesn't go the way you're hoping it goes, you can probably get a nice little return for him at the deadline to send him off to a team that has Stanley Cup aspirations. He has promising upside. I think he can bounce back, maybe not to the level he once was, but I think at 275, he can be a serviceable piece on a defense that definitely needs some help.
Yeah, I mean, his underlyings, even before this year, were tremendous. Again, just a couple of seasons ago, he had an expected goal share of 60.4% with the Bruins, 2021-2022 season. Before that, 61% expected goal share. This year, fell down all the way to 47.4%. His high danger chances for percentage also went down to 46%. Even his Corsi for shot attempts per 60, when he was on the ice, the Bruins only had 45% of the shot attempts. Just a big nosedive for him this year. you'd have to hope that he will bounce back for next season. But I just get concerned just because of his age and how he just really went down this past season. But outside of that move, the Penguins also signed Anthony Beauvillier to a 1-year contract worth $1.25 million. Again, another 1-year term. So I think with term with these contracts, I'm not concerned. That's whatever. If you're mad about the term for these, you should probably just go touch grass or something like that, to be honest. And even the money here, I don't think is that big of a problem. But Beauvillier was also just not that good this past season. 5 goals, 17 points overall. I don't think he's going to be nearly as bad as that with the Penguins. That would be kind of insane if he was worse than this past season. Beauvillier, going back to his Islander days, he was a really solid contributor in the middle six. He would always kill the Penguins, it felt like, every time he played them. But can he get back to the level? It's questionable at this point. So I think both of these moves, they're kind of quote unquote hope moves, kind of quote unquote praying moves. And I don't know, man, I kind of feel a little bit underwhelmed with that one as well. Just when I look at some of the other depth forwards out there that were also being signed today too, and that are also still out there right now.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's another underwhelming move, but I also look at Beauvillier is something that they could use in their bottom six. He's still got good foot speed. He's not a slow player. He's a little bit bigger, but at the same time, I mean, he's still got a little bit of a scoring touch. I think it's better than most of what they've brought in for the bottom six over the past couple of seasons. And there's definite upside there. It's not a guy that I think, though, if he bounces back this year, you fall in love with. You shake his hand and say thanks for everything at the end of this coming season and let him go, which kind of gets into another theory I have on what the Penguins might be doing right now, but that's a discussion for a later day. And again, it's 1 year, $1.25 million. I mean, that's the going rate for a bottom six forward at this point. They didn't overpay him. They didn't give him term. And if he bounces back, great. If not, no big deal. Who cares? Now, I would like to see them make better moves to bolster this roster, but we also knew this was coming. This was kind of hinted at by Dubas for the last couple weeks, where he was saying, listen, we're pretty much just going to go bargain shopping this offseason. We're not going to sign anybody with a big name to a long-term deal. We're not going to be players for the big names who are looking for big paydays. And that's understandable because they only had about $10 million in cap space going into noon o'clock today. Yes, I said noon o'clock. That was not a misspeak. But so you knew that they weren't going to be big name players. They weren't going to go big game hunting. And it comes back to, you look at both their salary cap space and their contracts, it's going to be really difficult for them to make any big splashes over the next 8 to 10 months, just because they're weighed down by a lot of bad deals. So this is where they're going to have to find a way to make it work.
The biggest thought I had come to my brain when I saw those two moves was that, okay, I know what your plan is for this year. It's obvious that I don't think they're thinking about making the playoffs this year. Overall, I think the playoffs for them, just in Dubas's mind, is a bit of a bonus. So I think he's thinking at it like, okay, we'll sign these two players, see if we can get their value back up, flip them at the deadline. That was the first thing that really popped into my head about that. Otherwise, they'll just move on at the end of the season if they don't get moved at the deadline. That was the first thought I had, just because, as it stands right now, I don't think this is a playoff team heading into next season. So I think their thinking is, okay, if they can play well, maybe Beauvillier finds his scoring touch a little bit again, especially on a fourth line role. I do think a fourth line role on this team for him would at least be decent overall. He's not playing with the awful Chicago Blackhawks like he was for a little bit of last season, but I still think they're thinking about maybe flipping them if the opportunity arises, next February, next March.
That's also something I think to keep in mind about Beauvillier too, is you look at his career, right? And he was with the Islanders when they were still pretty solid, and he contributed in a pretty good way. I mean, you look at his stat lines from the Islanders, he mostly had 10 or more goals every year he was there. And that was when they were still pretty competitive. Then he goes to Vancouver, who at the time, not that great, 9 goals. Back to the Islanders as they're kind of coming back to earth from being competitive, 9 goals again. Nashville, a couple
Remember,
seasons.
he was included in the Bo Horvat trade. So he was
Right.
traded to Vancouver. So 18 total goals that season overall.
Yeah, and this past year, really bad Chicago team and doesn't do well. So I think there is room for a bounce back, because then you also remember he's only 27 years old. He still has some hockey in front of him. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he's going to show up and light the world on fire. He's not. He could be a very good depth contributor if this team makes a couple smarter moves, but that's yet to be seen if they will. So overall, I think it's a solid depth move, if still underwhelming.
I think that's fair to say as well. I also could see him play potentially on the third line, depending on what else they do this offseason. I think we also have to remember, everyone, it's still July 1st. There are plenty of moves that get made throughout the month of July. Heck, we even sometimes see a couple moves in August overall. So I know GMs like vacationing during that time, but you still see some moves made during that time. I think the roster you see right now for the Penguins is not going to be the full final roster that you see come October. But one more move before we head to break here. Kyle Dubas announcing during his presser that the Penguins have signed center Blake Lizotte from the Los Angeles Kings. All we know right now is that it's a multi-year deal. I think that's the only multi-year deal that the Penguins have signed today. I don't know if it's 2 years. I don't know if it's 3 years. But based on his underlyings, based on his production, I really like this move overall, Pat. I mean, he spent the last several seasons with the Los Angeles Kings. This year, 7 goals, 15 points in 62 games. His best season came in 2022-2023, 11 goals, 34 points in 81 games. I really like this as someone that can be the fourth line center, bring some good offense, is good in his own zone, can penalty kill. And also, based off the way Kings fans are tweeting, they're not happy that he's gone. So I really like this move from Kyle Dubas and company.
Yeah, I'm excited to have him on the team. I think it's a good fourth line center option. I also think, and this is something we can dig into later in the week, that they're probably going to be dangling Lars Eller out there in a trade. But at the same time, I still want to see what the deal is. I don't want to overpay for a guy like this, but there is promise there that this can be a very solid fourth line center. You brought up his numbers. I'll bring this up. He'll be 26 when the season starts. This is the kind of player that Kyle Dubas has been talking about getting. Now, again, is he overly spectacular? No, he's not going to play on Crosby or Malkin's line. He's not going to score 25, 30 goals. But if he's your fourth line center and he chips in between 5 and 10, puts up 30, 35 points-ish, then you've got a good young player here. So without seeing the details of the contract, I'm happy this guy's on the roster for now. If it's a good deal, I'm even happier, but we will see. So this is a nice, savvy little move by Kyle Dubas, if you ask me.
I agree. And it will be interesting to see what the domino effect now is at center, because you bring in Kevin Hayes. He's going to start at center. That's what Kyle Dubas said during his presser today. You have Noah Chari. He can play center. He can also play wing. And I do think he should be moved to wing if he is on this team next year. I think he's better at wing overall. You also have Lars Eller on the team right now. Does that make him expendable? And now you have Blake Lizotte, who's coming in, who is a pure center. Something's going to have to give there. I think if I had to guess right now, I think it's Eller that might get moved at some point this offseason, but we'll have to see what their full plans are as we go through the month of July as a whole. But that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Pat and I are going to discuss the Reilly Smith trade and why Kyle Dubas did a fairly decent job with that move. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the FanDuel app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. That's FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, the Penguins did make a trade on Monday, sending Reilly Smith to the New York Rangers for 2 draft picks. Number 1, a 2027 second-round pick, and number 2, a 2025 fifth-round pick. The Penguins are also retaining 25% of Smith's salary, so that comes out to $1.25 million overall. They're able to clear $3.75 million in cap space to send Smith to the Rangers, and I'm fine with that move. They get out of the contract, at least mostly. I know it's kind of annoying they're sending him to a division rival, but I wish him all the best overall. I really hope that he's able to at least find his form a little bit again for the Rangers. Just hopefully he's not scoring on the Penguins overall. But I think that's a nice piece of business from Kyle Dubas. You get more back for him than you paid for last year. So I am totally fine with that trade.
Yeah, this is good asset management by Kyle Dubas. He turned Reilly Smith into more of what he sent out, so to speak. One other thing to add about the trade, though, the 5th round pick is conditional. Because the New York Rangers have both their own 2025 5th round pick and Minnesota's 2025 5th round pick. Whichever one is lower in the draft, that's the one that the Penguins will get once this trade comes to its completion at the draft next year. But I want to add this about Kyle Dubas. When it comes to him as a manager, I don't like the way he signs players. I have never really been a fan of his signings going all the way back to Toronto. I think he loses those quite a bit. I think we're seeing he's lost quite a few of them here in Pittsburgh when you think of the Ryan Graves deal and now the Tristan Jarry deal. But on the flip side of that, he never loses trades. He may not win them, but he never loses a trade. You look at a lot of the deals he makes, and it's either very good asset management or he gets something good in return. You can hem and haw about the Jake Guentzel trade all you want, but he got all of that out of Carolina, and all Carolina got was a few playoff games of Jake Guentzel, and now he's in Tampa Bay. And the Penguins now have a couple of good prospects. They got a draft pick out of it, to which looks like a guy who might have a lot more upside than once thought. You have Michael Bunting, and that's a good deal. And then you look at this one. Yeah, it's going to sting a little bit holding on to $1.25 million of his salary, but it's only through the end of this coming season. And with the way Dubas has been cooking in the second round the last couple of years, I'm good with giving him another second round pick. So overall, very happy with this trade. And I also agree with what you said. Obviously, I don't want him scoring against the Penguins. That would suck. But by all accounts, this is a good dude who's a pretty good hockey player. And this was just a square peg, round hole scenario for him. He just didn't fit here for whatever reason, whether it was personal, he didn't want to play here, wanted to stay in Vegas, or it just wasn't the type of team he fits in with. Would love to see him get his game back and get one last big deal before he calls it a career, because he has gone, you look at his career pre-Vegas, this is a guy who's been a steady soldier, been in some bad situations. You always want to see players like that succeed.
At the end of the day, the move just really didn't work out. I loved it at the time. I thought he was going to be a great fit with the Penguins. He was, I think, everything they needed for another winger for Evgeny Malkin, and it just kind of fizzled out after a month. Sometimes those things happen, but I wish him all the best with the Rangers, and I do hope he plays a bit better this year overall. But now that he's dealt, this kind of does leave a little bit of a hole in the lineup for the Penguins. You know, you look up and down this lineup right now. I mean, it's great for the top six. You have Michael Bunting, Rickard Rakell is still there right now. The Penguins are hoping for a bounce back of Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, Brian Rust. I think that's 5 of your top 6 players right now. Who else is going to play in the top 6? I think Drew O'Connor can do it in spurts. I think he's a very good depth player. If someone gets hurt, he can come up there for 15, 20, 25 games, do the job. But do I trust Drew O'Connor to do the job for a full 82-game season? Not yet. I'm not there just yet. And it's why I think they still need to go out there, whether it's via trade or free agency, and get Crosby a winger to play on his left wing. Whether that's someone like Jeff Skinner, who, as of this recording at 5:30 p.m. on Monday, he has not signed with the team yet. There's been interest from multiple teams. I'm not sure if the Penguins are in on him, but I think if the Penguins can get him on a short-term deal where the money makes sense, I would definitely do that. Or whether it's someone else, this team badly needs another top 6 winger, I think.
They do. And you hit the nail on the head. I like Drew O'Connor. I was very happy to see the way he developed and performed this past season. That has been something this organization has been missing since the Stanley Cup runs. A younger guy who comes in, makes his mark, and develops pretty well. But I'm still skeptical on him as a full-time top 6 winger. I would love to see Jeff Skinner as a Penguin, but I also want to add the caveat that I feel like I have to add every July 1st. This is not NHL 24. You can't just click a button, offer a guy a contract, and he signs it. He has to want to come here. There is always that aspect that I think people forget. I would have loved for them to sign Jeff Skinner at 12:02 p.m. July 1st to a 1-year, hey, go out and get your cookies with Sidney Crosby, and then next year you can go get paid. But there might not be interest from him in coming to Pittsburgh. I also think that you could probably still keep your eye on Patrik Laine. I think that I look at some of the moves Columbus made today, and they're still very much Columbusing in just being completely baffling, despite having a better GM now. And if you can pull him out of there and send something back, I would take him and see what he does on Crosby's wing.
Yeah, I think that's also pretty reasonable. I think he's at least worth a flyer to me if you can make that work, but you also have to figure out the salary situation as well. And I know the Penguins, they're leaving some salary cap space open this summer just for that type of deal. Just not sure they are going to maybe go after Laine, but I think it's at least something that I would take a flyer on overall. A couple more moves to discuss before we head to our final segment. The Penguins also re-signing defenseman Ryan Shea to a 1-year contract, $775,000 at the NHL level. Really good depth overall. I'm happy with him. I think at the start of the NHL season, he did not look like an NHL caliber defenseman to me, but as he got more seasoning towards the end of the season, it looked like he at least belonged to the NHL level. He's a good number 7, number 8 defenseman to have. Very happy with that signing. And then also they signed Emil Bemstrom to a 1-year deal, $775,000 as well, 16 points in 56 games this past season. He's going to be in contention for a spot in the bottom 6. And yes, Pat, I have the same reaction that you have where I'm just like, okay, cool. I guess we're bringing him back. They didn't qualify him as one of their RFAs. He turned into a UFA. I thought that meant they were going to be moving on from him, but I guess they decided to bring him back for 1 more year. I don't know. I guess it's fine, but what do you think?
I'm going to give our listeners who are wearing headphones a moment here to turn down their volume and address the Bemstrom re-signing. Why? He isn't good. Like, it's a nothing contract. It's less than $1 million. It's whatever. Maybe it works out. Maybe it doesn't. But he's not good. Like, there's no need for this. I don't get it. But whatever. It's $775. Who cares? Ryan Shea, on the other hand, I like that a lot. Him and Jack St. Ivany showed that they had some real chemistry as a bottom pairing. Obviously, they've got more defensemen they know what to do with right now after signing Grzelcyk and bringing him back and still with everybody else that's on the roster. But that's a good safety blanket, I think, to have for your bottom pairing with those two. So, I mean, again, I know a lot of people are underwhelmed and unhappy today, and I don't blame them at all because, you know, we have been on a carousel ride in space the last 20 years with how great the Penguins have been. So this is a little bit different territory, but overall, I mean, we knew this was coming. Kyle Dubas said that there was going to be bargain shopping and bargain hunting at this free agency day. So overall, I don't get bringing back Bemstrom, but whatever, it's a nothing contract, and Shea's good defensive depth to have on your roster.
Yep, I agree on both there. And with that said, we're going to discuss what Kyle Dubas said to the media on Monday right after this. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So Kyle Dubas had a lot to say to the media on Monday when discussing the moves that he made, whether it's Grzelcyk, Beauvillier, Ryan Shea, Blake Lizotte, etc. But it's a comment that he made about the Penguins on ice direction, just because I think a lot of fans want to know, like, is this a retool? Is this a massive rebuild? Are you tearing it down? Like, what's going on with the core? And Dubas said they're not looking to squeak into the playoffs, but become a contender as quick as possible. He said, we're not going to strip it down to the studs situation here. We're trying to use every method we can to acquire future assets. And he did say he would like for the Penguins to be a contender by the time Crosby, Malkin, and Letang hang it up. Okay, I appreciate him saying that. I don't think this team is going to be a Stanley Cup contender by the time those three are ready to hang it up. And I know that's in about a few years at this point, probably about 3 overall. I don't think they're going to be a contender right then. I think it's going to take a little bit more time overall for this team to be back to a bona fide Stanley Cup contender. And I just wish he would go out there to the media and just say, yeah, we're doing a small rebuild right now, because that is what this is. You look at the moves you've seen today, you look at the moves you've seen during the draft, and heck, even during the trade deadline, this team is doing a rebuild on the fly. He's not saying it, but that's exactly what he's doing right now.
Yeah. And okay, so I hinted at it earlier in the show. This is my theory of what I think the Penguins are doing. If you follow me on Twitter, you've seen me say it already today. I may expand on it in a blog post later on sometime this summer. But I think they are punting on this season, this upcoming season. I think they are fully accepting that, listen, this season, with the amount of mistakes that we have made over the past couple of years, we're in a bad spot. Sidney Crosby still has a couple of good years left of hockey. Evgeny Malkin likely does too. Chris Letang likely does as well. Erik Karlsson, same deal. Next summer, they, at this juncture right now, before our friends at Cap Friendly go dark, which Puckpedia got to step it up here soon, because if you're our go-to, you got a lot of improvement to make. But right now, at this moment, with the salary cap expected to be $92 million in the 2025-2026 season, the Penguins have $36.3 million of cap space. I think next season, 25-26, is going to be the last go-for-it year in this era. I think that they're looking at that and saying, all right, chances are over the next year, we can move on from some of these big contracts. We can maybe move Jari. We can maybe move Raquel. We can maybe do something with Ryan Graves to get rid of him. We'll get Crosby on some kind of a 3 to 4 year extension in the next few weeks or over the next year. And then you figure they're going to have anywhere between $20 and $30 million in cap space, depending on what they do with Crosby and maybe even Marcus Pettersson. Although I don't think it would be the worst idea to maybe move Marcus Pettersson and recoup a bunch of assets, but we'll see. And I think at that point, you'll have 20-some million dollars in cap space, and the only notable UFAs you are going to have are, like I said, Sidney Crosby, but we know an extension's coming. Marcus Pettersson, we'll see what happens. Grzelcyk will be a UFA, doesn't matter. Eller, UFA if they hold on to him. Beauvillier, UFA. DOC, UFA. Puljujarvi, UFA. And Matt Nieto, UFA if he's still here. So you hope that some of these younger guys that you've drafted over the past couple of years can come up and make some kind of a difference. And then you can go big game hunting on July 1st. And that'll be all she wrote for this era. That'll be the empty the tank. And I know a lot of people are saying to me, well, you can't guarantee that the core guys are still going to be great. If you go big game hunting the right way on July 1st, they don't have to be. You can surround them with enough talent that they can contribute, and so can the guys you bring in. So I think you're right. They are doing a mini rebuild on the fly. And next summer, if they play their cards right, they can make sweeping changes to this roster.
I can understand what you're saying. I know I've said numerous times on the show that I felt like this year had to be the last all-in big year, just because of the way Crosby played this past season, the way Letang played for most of the season, the way Malkin looked rejuvenated once Bunting got to his line. But I also do at least understand a little bit the direction that Dubas is taking the team in right now. And to your point, I do get that why they could go big game hunting next year. Hopefully the free agency class, though, is a bit better than this year's one, just because this year, outside of a few guys, there really wasn't too much. I mean, some of the deals that we've seen today have been absolutely outrageous, man. So we'll have to see there. And then with the Sidney Crosby extension, I know it hasn't been announced yet, but we got to think that's coming very soon, right? I know some people are a little bit concerned about that, but I really don't think this is going to be a problem at all. He's going to sign that 3-year extension sooner rather than later, I would think, and then this will all be moot. I don't think this is going to take too much longer. I mean, he said numerous times that he wants to retire a Penguin. This should not take that long for negotiations.
He also wants to follow in the footsteps of his hero, Stevie Y. He wants to play his entire career with one franchise like Yzerman did with the Red Wings. So I think either way, he's going to go down with the ship, and he's only going to play for the Penguins. Maybe Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang play out their contracts and go somewhere else. I would hate to see it, but it's a distinct possibility. So either way, we're going to get a Crosby extension. I would be totally beside myself if it doesn't happen.
Right. I would agree with that. And then one more comment from Dubas that I really want to highlight. He said during his presser that they want to add another good young player or do another deal similar to the Kevin Hayes trade where they take on a contract, but they also get a sweetener to it. He said, we're wide open on what we want to do. I'm curious about that. What younger player do you want to bring in this offseason for your lineup? Or who else would you take along with a sweetener from another team that's trying to unload a contract? I'm going to have to come up with some options. I think one that comes to mind potentially for me out of Vancouver is Connor Garland, if they want to do that. But I'm not fully sure what that means overall in terms of who they could be targeting.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see who that is, because you look at it right now as it stands today, there's only 3 teams that are above the cap, and it's Vancouver and Toronto, who are less than $1 million over. So that's going to be very easy to rectify. But it might be time to give your fellow Metropolitan Division rival, the Washington Capitals, a call, because they are $14 million over the salary cap. And for some of the guys that they could put on LTIR or move out, they still have a long way to go. Because, yeah, maybe they LTIR TJ Oshie before he retires, but that's still only 5.75. And then you look at the rest of their roster, and it's just, there's a lot of guys on there that could be moved. I mean, if you're really looking for someone to make a difference in your middle 6, you could maybe call up for Sonny Milano. You could maybe see what they want to do with Dylan Strome, but again, that's $5 million forever. So
they won't trade Dylan Strome.
But and they're not going to get rid of Connor McMichael. That's a good young player. But again, you look at the Capitals and $14 million over the cap. They better hope that their buddies that they just bought and cap friendly have some magic up their sleeves, because this could be a disappointing summer for the Caps, who have been pretty savvy, but $14 million over the salary cap is very hard to rectify.
Oh, well, they'll figure it out. I'm sure they'll have maybe a little bit of problems at the start, but I think they'll have it all figured out by the time the season starts. I don't think for a second they're going to trade Dylan Strome. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I think they see him as a core piece for a while. I do think maybe also someone like Nick Robertson, formerly of Toronto, could make sense with the Penguins. Dubas also knows him, so yeah, that factor. But I do think just as an option at forward for the bottom 6, I could see Robertson as an option too. Is there anything else you want to highlight from Dubas's comments today before we call it?
Not particularly. I mean, I do agree with you in the sense that I would like him to admit what's happening here, because this is a rebuild, retool on the fly. But you know that that's a no-win situation. He's going to come out and say what he said now. People aren't going to like it. If he comes out and says, hey, this is a rebuild, retool on the fly, everybody's going to say, well, you still got Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Carlson. What do you mean you're doing a rebuild on the fly? So it's just a no-win. I'm fine with whatever he's saying now. Again, react to the moves. Don't react to the words.
I think that's a very good way to put it. And again, people, it's only July 1st. More moves are going to be made around the league as this month goes by. Would not be surprised if Dubas and company do have another trick up their sleeve overall to at least improve this team a little bit heading into the season overall. And for as much as I am at least a bit underwhelmed by some of the moves today, I don't think they're quote unquote awful, bad moves, anything like that. I just want to put that out there to everyone as I end the show.
Like you said, it's just like you said last offseason. C.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I felt very meh last offseason. I'm feeling the same today, even though I kind of knew what to expect going in just because I knew they weren't going to be in on a lot of the top targets. It's kind of been a interesting change of scenery as this team goes from being a bona fide cup contender to a team that's in a transitionary period overall. But I think that'll do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. Pat and I will be back with another show for you all on Tuesday to discuss more moves that were made today, including the AHL signings that Dubas made, and also look ahead to the rest of the month as well. But for Patrick Damp, I'm Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll talk with you all on Tuesday.